Hey, my love, it's Sherry Pearl, and you're listening to Dust of Passion Stories. Tonight's letter is from Evelyn, 40, divorced, and one quiet artist who doesn't ask for her number, only one evening and permission to see her like art. The night I became his canvas. Dear Sherry, I'm 40 years old, divorced, and for most of my adult life, I treated my body the way you treat an old piece of furniture in the corner of the room. Useful, familiar, nothing worth really looking at. Then I met an artist who asked if he could borrow me for one evening. Not my time, not my number, my body. His name is Elias. I didn't meet him in a gallery or at some glamorous opening. I met him at my friend's birthday dinner, at a long table in a too-loud restaurant where I was trying to decide if I'd have enough courage to go home alone instead of texting my ex. He was sitting across from me, quiet, long-fingered, with paint on his cuticles and a shirt that had seen better days. When the conversation turned to jobs, everyone around the table did the usual performance, promotions, projects, deadlines. When it was his turn, he just said, "I paint," and shrugged. Something about the simplicity of it made me look up. Later that night, when half the table had peeled off for cigarettes and the other half for phones and selfies, he leaned across the scattered dessert plates and asked, "And what do you do when you're not pretending everything is fine?" The question startled me more than any flirtation would have. I laughed a little too loudly, and then, maybe because I'd had one glass of wine too many, or maybe because I was tired of hearing my own rehearsed answers, I told him the truth. I work in HR. I tell people they're a great fit for the team and then go home and fall asleep scrolling other people's lives. He smiled slowly. "And what would you do," he asked, "if you were allowed to be less reasonable for one night?" "I'd need someone to give me a good excuse," I said. He didn't flirt. He didn't say the usual things. He just studied my face for a moment, as if he were already sketching it in his mind. And then, "Let me paint you," he said. "Not on a canvas, on you. One evening. No one else needs to know. No obligation, no expectations. Just you, me, and colour." I felt the invitation land low in my stomach before my mind caught up. I tried to deflect it with humour. "I'm not exactly 22 and symmetrical," I said. His eyes didn't even flicker. "Good," he replied. "I don't paint mannequins. I paint stories." Something in his voice made it impossible to roll my eyes and walk away. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't conquest. It was curiosity and a kind of quiet certainty I hadn't seen in a long time. He gave me an address and a time. Saturday, 8 p.m. "Think about it," he said. "And if you change your mind, just don't show up. I'll survive." I spent the whole week thinking about it. On Saturday, I stood outside his building with my heart thrumming in my throat. It wasn't a grand atelier, just a converted warehouse at the edge of the city, the kind people turn into questionable clubs or vintage furniture stores. The stairwell smelled of dust and turpentine. His studio door was open a crack. Warm light spilled out into the dim hallway. I knocked gently and pushed it open. The first thing I noticed was the size of the space. High ceilings, tall windows, canvases stacked against the walls like quiet giants. The second thing was the smell. Oil paint, coffee, something faintly woody, like old floors and easels. And then I saw him. Barefoot, in paint-splattered jeans and a black shirt rolled up at the sleeves. His hair was pulled back, a pencil tucked into it like a hairpin. He looked at home in that chaos in a way I'd never seen anyone look at home in an office. "You came," he said simply. "You make it sound like I walked into a trap," I replied, trying to sound lighter than I felt. He shook his head. "If it's a trap, it's one you built with your own feet this week," he said. "Tea, wine, water." "Water," I said. I already felt dizzy enough. He handed me a glass and gestured around. "Take a look if you want," he said. "I'll set up." I walked slowly along the walls, pretending to study the paintings so I didn't have to think too much about what I'd agreed to. They weren't pretty in the way hotel art is pretty. They were raw. Bodies mostly, sometimes almost abstract. Shoulders, collarbones, hands, a curve of a back disappearing into shadow. None of them perfect. All of them painfully alive. There were colours where the body isn't supposed to have colours. Turquoise along a spine, gold brushed lightly across a rib cage, streaks of red where skin should have been pale. It didn't look violent. It looked honest. Like he'd painted how touch feels, not how skin looks. "Is this what you want to do to me?" I asked before I could stop myself. He paused, a brush in one hand, a palette in the other. "No," he said. "That's what I did to them. With you, I'll find out what your body says first." A shiver ran down my arms that had nothing to do with temperature. He'd set up a space in the centre of the room. A wide, low platform covered in soft, clean sheets. A stand with brushes and paints beside it. 2 lamps with warm bulbs, angled so the light would fall gently without harsh shadows. To one side, a folding screen. "You can change behind there," he said, as if he were offering me a towel at a swimming pool. "Wear something you don't mind getting paint on. Or nothing. Up to you." He didn't follow me with his eyes. He just turned away, busying himself with jars and brushes, giving me the kind of privacy that felt like trust, not disinterest. I stepped behind the screen with my heart beating in my throat. I had brought an old black bra and panties, simple, no lace, and a loose, thin cotton robe. I could have kept my jeans and t-shirt on and walked out pretending I'd changed my mind. That thought lingered for a second, but my hands had already started undoing my buttons. When I caught sight of myself in the small mirror propped up behind the screen, I hesitated. My stomach wasn't flat. There were faint silver lines at my hips from pregnancies. My thighs touched. My breasts had lost the high, easy confidence they'd had at 25. I stood there, in my bra and panties and robe, and thought, this is the body that worked, carried, fed, walked out of a marriage alive. And then, very quietly, this is the body that has not been looked at, not really looked at, in years. I tied the robe loosely and stepped out. He turned when he heard me. His gaze dropped, not sharply, but slowly, from my face to the knot of the robe at my waist, down to my bare calves and back up again. He lifted his hand, palm up, and waited. For a second, I just stood there, feeling my pulse in my throat. Then I stepped closer and placed the end of the belt in his hand. He closed his fingers around the fabric and met my eyes one more time, as if asking a question without saying a word. I didn't look away. He pulled the knot loose and let the robe fall open. "I told you," I said, trying to break the tension with a joke. "Not 22, not symmetrical." He stepped back a little, as if to get a better view. His eyes softened. "Symmetry is for furniture," he said. "You're human." I laughed, and the sound loosened something in my chest. It came out a bit too bright, a bit too high. He smiled like he'd expected that. "Lie down," he said gently, gesturing to the platform. I climbed up, the sheet cool against the backs of my thighs, my shoulders, the small of my back. The robe slipped away to either side, framing me like a dark border. For a moment, I folded my arms over my stomach, then deliberately dropped them to my sides. He didn't move in immediately. He just stood at the foot of the platform for a breath, taking me in, giving me space to change my mind. I stayed where I was. He took that as his yes. "I'm going to start with my hands," he said. "No brush yet. Paint comes later." He knelt beside me. His fingers hovered a few centimeters above my skin, as if he were warming his hands on the heat of me first. I could have flinched away. Instead, I went still and let my ribs rise and fall under his gaze. Then he closed the distance. His first touch was at my collarbone. Just the pads of his fingers, tracing the line from the center out to my shoulder. Featherlight, slow, exploratory, like a blind man reading a sentence. My skin came alive under his hand. He moved down, fingertips sliding along the hollow just below my throat, then across my sternum, careful, circling the curve of my breasts without crossing any line I hadn't clearly opened. His attention never felt greedy. It felt like he was taking notes. I realized I'd been holding my breath again. I let it out slowly. My chest rose and fell, and his hand followed the movement for a moment, as if he were checking that I was still there with him. When his fingers brushed the soft skin at my side, just above my hip, something in me flickered. On the exhale, I felt myself almost pull away inside. On the inhale, I consciously let my body sink back into the sheet. He noticed. His palm flattened there, broad and warm, not pressing, just resting, as if to say, "Here. Stay here." At my stomach, he spread his fingers and left them there for a moment. I felt the old reflex, the urge to pull in, flatten, minimize, rise like a tide. Instead, I let my belly soften against his hand. If he felt the tremor in my muscles, he didn't show it. His thumb drew one slow, absent-minded arc on my skin. Not a tickle, a reassurance. By the time his hand moved lower, along the outside of my hip, down my thigh, stopping above my knee, my whole body was humming. Not with panic, with awareness. He sat back eventually, hands resting lightly on my shins for a second, grounding me. "Okay," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "Now I know where to put the colour." The first brushstroke was at my shoulder. The paint was cool at first, a thin line of deep midnight blue tracing the curve from the base of my neck out towards the tip of my shoulder. The bristles were soft but insistent, leaving a faint tickle in their wake. He stood above me, one hand steadying the canvas of my body, the other guiding the brush. I watched his face as he worked. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in judgment but in concentration. His mouth softened. He looked more like a man in prayer than a man at work. "What colour is that?" I asked. "Blue," he said. "The kind of blue you wear when you pretend you're fine." "That sounds specific," I said, half smiling. He dipped the brush again. "It's the colour under your eyes when you talk about your job," he said, "and the tint on your lips when you say 'I'm okay' too quickly." The brush moved down my arm now, a slow, deliberate line. I shivered, a small tremor running from my shoulder to my wrist. He paused, watching me. I exhaled, and let my hand relax on the sheet instead of curling into a fist. He saw that and carried on. The next colour was warmer, gold, like candlelight. He painted a soft, irregular shape just above my heart, over my left breast, careful, tracing around the swell rather than over it, the softest edge of the brush grazing skin that hadn't been given that kind of attention in years. The gold glowed faintly against my skin. "This," he murmured, almost to himself, "is the part of you that still believes in something softer. I can see it when you laugh." "You've seen me laugh once," I said. He smiled without looking up. "Once was enough," he replied. He moved lower to my abdomen. My instinct was to tense, to pull in, to hide. The old habit hit hard. My back wanted to arch away, my muscles to armour up. I felt it happen, and made a different choice. I sank down into the platform and let my stomach expand under his gaze instead of retreating from it. His free hand settled on my side, just above my hip, steady and unhurried, as if he were anchoring me without pinning me. The word red never left his mouth, but I felt it the moment the new colour touched the soft curve below my navel. The brush was cooler than his hand, the stroke slow, deliberate, wandering dangerously close to the place I'd spent years pretending lived only in theory. Heat moved through me, not sharp, just insistent, like an ember waking up. He painted slowly, watching my face as much as his work. Shapes that were not quite flames, not quite petals. A suggestion of movement rather than anything literal. I could have shifted away. Instead, I found my knees loosening a fraction, my thighs relaxing, granting him more space without a single word spoken. His fingers left faint smudges of colour when he steadied my hips, my ribs, my shoulder. Small fingerprints of blue, gold, red, evidence that he had been there. At some point, I stopped trying to follow exactly where the brush was. I closed my eyes and let my body track it instead. The cool kiss of paint at my thigh, the warmth of his breath near my stomach as he bent over me, the light drag of his knuckles against my hip as he reached across. Time blurred. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me. Brush paused in the air, head tilted. Without saying anything, he angled his hand, inviting me to move. I rolled carefully onto my side, then onto my stomach, feeling the sheet brush against the painted parts of me. A new sensation, strange and intimate. The robe slid completely off, pooling at my waist and then falling to the floor. For a heartbeat, I froze, waiting for the old rush of shame, the urge to grab fabric, cover, apologize. It didn't come. He placed his hand in the center of my back, broad and gentle, not pressing me down, just there. I let my cheek rest against the sheet and stayed. That was my answer. He took it. The brush returned, cooler now, tracing lines along the muscles of my back, up towards my shoulders, down towards the small of my back. The paint tickled and soothed in the same stroke. When he reached the curve where my back meets my hips, my breath hitched. I felt one of his fingers curl slightly, the barest increase of pressure, as if asking silently, "Here too?" My hips eased back into his touch. He continued. The red returned here too, mingling with darker shades. It felt like he was mapping every place my body still remembered being touched with care, and every place it had been ignored. At one point, his hand slid almost accidentally to the back of my thigh, fingers curving gently around it, holding me steady as he painted just above the place where fabric met skin. His thumb pressed into my flesh just enough to make my breath catch. I didn't move away. My skin burned under his touch. He didn't immediately remove his hand, neither did I ask him to. Eventually, the brush made a small, final flourish and stilled. I heard the faint clink as he set it down. "Sit up," he said softly after a moment. "If you feel like it." I pushed myself upright. The sheet slipped from my shoulders. He reached out on instinct to catch it, and his knuckles bumped my chin, leaving a tiny streak of blue on the tip of it. We both froze, then laughed at the same time. "There," he said, eyes crinkling. "Signature." I wiped at it uselessly with the back of my hand, only managing to smear it more. "For the record," I muttered, "I did not agree to a blue nose." "For the record," he replied, "it looks good on you." The silliness of it broke the tension for a moment. My shoulders dropped. Something in me trusted him more for not treating the whole night like a fragile glass object. Then I saw myself in the tall mirror propped against the wall. I looked otherworldly. Lines of blue along my arms, my ribs, my shoulders, gold blooming across my chest and collarbones, red curling low on my stomach, at my hips, the beginnings of it on my thighs. My skin was still mine, but it had become a landscape of colour and story. For a moment, I didn't recognise myself. Then I did. I saw the woman who had survived, the woman who had wanted, the woman who had hidden, all of her, on one body. Tears pricked at my eyes. "Don't cry yet," he said softly, stepping behind me. I could see him in the mirror now, standing close, his paint-splattered shirt, his steady hands. "I haven't finished." His hands settled on my shoulders, thumbs brushing the gold. The contact was stronger now, surer, the grip of someone who knows the weight they're holding. Our eyes met in the mirror, and he didn't look away. He stepped closer behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his chest along my back. His mouth hovered just a breath away from my ear. He didn't lean in. He waited. I let my head tip back the smallest bit against his shoulder, my lips parting on a quiet inhale. My hand lifted from my lap and found his forearm, fingers curling there, keeping him exactly where he was. It wasn't a word, but it was an answer. That was all he needed. He lowered his head, and his mouth finally found mine. The first brush of his lips was soft, careful, like testing colour on a fresh palette. I met him halfway. The kiss deepened gradually. No cinematic crash, no desperate grabbing, just the slow discovery of how our mouths moved together. His lips were warm. His breath tasted faintly of coffee. I felt his stubble graze my upper lip, the rough, soft contrast sending a line of heat down my spine. His hand slid from my shoulders to the back of my neck, fingers threading into my hair. My own hand tightened on his forearm for a second, then slid higher, over his bicep to his shoulder, pulling him closer. The platform creaked quietly beneath us as we shifted, my back yielding into his chest. "This is," I whispered against his mouth, though I wasn't even sure what I wanted to name. He rested his forehead against my temple for a heartbeat, breathing me in. I leaned into that contact without thinking, turning just enough to chase his mouth again. That answered that question. He kissed me once more, firmer now. Still not rough, but with a certainty that made my stomach twist in the best possible way. His hand slipped to the small of my back, fingers spreading, drawing me closer, erasing the last of the careful distance we'd maintained. I felt the solid length of his body along mine, the steady, unhurried way he explored my mouth as if he had all the time in the world and no intention of taking more than I was offering. Somewhere in the background, a pipe clanged in the wall. Inside, all I could hear was the quiet rasp of our breathing and the faint rustle of sheets against painted skin. I won't tell you how far we went that night, Sherry. Not because I'm coy, and not because I'm ashamed, but because there are parts of that evening that belong to the white space between brushstrokes, not the brushstrokes themselves. I will tell you this, there was a moment when he stood behind me at the platform instead of the easel, his chest against my back, his arms around me, his paint-stained hands travelling over the same lines he'd drawn in colour hours before. His fingers rested lightly over my ribs, my hips, my thighs, moving with a confidence that came not from entitlement, but from having paid attention. And later, when we weren't sitting anymore, when the lamplight had turned soft and the night outside the high windows had thickened, there was a point at which I realized something important. It wasn't just my body he was waking up. It was the part of me that had stopped believing I was still allowed to be touched like this, with patience, with attention, with the kind of hunger that doesn't take, but invites. We didn't sleep much that night, not because of the hard platform. In the morning, the light through the high windows was unforgiving in its clarity. Dust motes floated above us like lazy fireworks. I expected to feel regret, or embarrassment, or the familiar mental hangover of what have I done. Instead, I felt tender. Tender towards my own body, now smeared and blurred with traces of the night. Tender towards the man sleeping beside me with a red fingerprint on his jaw where I must have touched him. He woke slowly, rubbing his eyes, then smiled when he saw me watching him. "Don't shower yet," he said. "Come here." He sat me in front of the mirror again. The paint had shifted, smudged, mixed with sweat and movement. The lines weren't as crisp. Some of the colours had blended into each other in ways he hadn't planned. "It's better," he said simply. "Is it?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "because now it's not just what I did to you, it's what you did with it." He reached for a brush, dipped it lightly in clean water this time, and traced a slow line along my shoulder, cleaning away a bit of blue to reveal my skin underneath. "You know paint washes off," he said softly. "But I hope the way you see yourself now doesn't." I looked at myself. At 40, with sleep-ruffled hair, smudged makeup, colour on my skin, and the memory of his weight still warm in my muscles, I looked more alive than I had in a decade. "I don't think it will," I said. "Sherry, I'm not writing to tell your listeners to go find the nearest tortured artist and let him paint them naked. What I want to share is this. For years, I treated my body like an afterthought. A vehicle for work, for duty, for children, for sex that often felt like performance. That night, on a makeshift bed in a paint-splattered studio, my body became a canvas, a story, a place someone wanted to stay in and look at slowly. The most erotic part wasn't when he undressed me. It was when he paused before each new place and left enough space for my body to lean in or away, and I kept leaning in. It wasn't when we finally gave in to the pull between us. It was the moment, much earlier, when he put his hand on my stomach and didn't ask it to be smaller, only present. Your listeners might not end up in a studio with a man like Elias, but maybe some of them will pick up a brush and draw one line of colour along their own skin in the bathroom mirror. or put on red lipstick just to walk around the house, or light a candle and look at their naked body not as a problem to be fixed, but as a canvas that has already lived 100 chapters. If my story does anything, I hope it whispers this into someone's ear. Your body is not past tense. It is still being written, and if someone is lucky enough to touch it, they should treat it like art, not property. That night, I didn't become his masterpiece. I became my own Evelyn. My love. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't being wanted. It's staying present while someone looks at you, and not apologizing for taking up space. Until next time, this was Dust of Passion Stories.